Maestro Teddy Abrams, thank you so much for joining the Sheckler Spotlight.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be with you here.
Absolutely. So where are you currently joining us from?
I'm here in Louisville, Kentucky, right in the heart of the city, at home.
Fabulous. We were just talking before we started that there's some weather changing. We're kind of getting to the end of October, and here in Iowa we have snow, and you're talking about the fluctuations in the weather there. So how do you enjoy living in Louisville and the climate and everything?
I love it. It's a really wonderful city, and not a city that I think people really understand unless they've been here, because unless you come here for the Derby or you're a huge fan of bourbon and you've taken the Bourbon Trail tours, you might not know a lot about Louisville. And I was in that category. And when I first visited the city, I kind of fell in love with it and thought this is just such an amazing place. And it's having this resurgence and renaissance. And so it's a very special town. And I think it's great, even for a West Coaster like me. I'm from San Francisco, but I love it here.
Fantastic. So my age, the age demographic of the audience that watches my videos it's a wide age demographic. I have a lot of young music students, and then I have some college age students, and then I just have amateurs and people who just enjoy music. So what I like to do for the young students, I'd like to kind of go back to the beginning and find out, what are your musical origins and how did you get into this music world, this classical world?
Well, we had a piano at home, which my mom wanted to learn to play, but never actually did. So it just sat there in the house. And when I was a little kid, about 3 or 4, I'd go over to the piano all the time and improvise and just, make all kinds of sounds, which led to my parents wanting me to actually take lessons. And so I did and enjoyed them. Wasn't, I don't think that I was taking it all that seriously, but I was a good student. However, when the school that I went to decided to start a band program for 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, and I was just going into 3rd grade. That was the real beginning of my serious interest in music. So I was a 2nd grader, and they said, next year you have the opportunity to sign up for a band. We're going to try this out for elementary school. They'd never done that before. I chose the saxophone and was immediately told I can't play the saxophone. My fingers were too small. So they said, here, clarinet it is. And I thought, well, clarinet sounds good. I didn't want to choose that one, but that's what they gave me. And for whatever reason, I don't really have an explanation for this, but it came very naturally to me. Piano, I was just like any other young pianist. I definitely worked at the piano. So, I could play Chopin and Brahms pieces and things like that as a little kid, but not like Yu Wang or something like that. But with the clarinet, I can't explain it. But after the first week, I had finished playing the whole band book. Like I don't know why. It doesn't really make a lot of sense in my mind. And I loved it.
What age was this?
I was 8.
And you're 8 and you're just flying through these music books.
Yeah, I don't know why. Like, I don't fully get it. It must be like a partly a physical thing and another just attachment thing, as in I enjoyed playing it enough that I kept wanting to do it. And, by week 1, most of the kids were squeaking away. It's just nobody, really expects much after 1 week on a clarinet. And so that's when, I took it really seriously. I spent the time on the clarinet to actually get better. And that's when my parents, who, they didn't really go to orchestra concerts. That wasn't something our family did. Not to say that I didn't come from a really, wonderfully cultured family, but orchestral and classical concerts weren't part of my upbringing. That's when they decided, well, let's go see something. He should see a professional musician play something. It's probably about time. So that first summer after I started playing the clarinet, when I was 9 years old, they took me to a free concert in San Francisco, free San Francisco Symphony, outdoor concert, all Gershwin. My first time ever seeing a real concert, like a professional concert. And I fell in love with it within 1 minute. During the Star Spangled Banner, basically. And I decided right then and there that I wanted to be a conductor. And I didn't know anything about conducting. I'd never even seen an orchestra before that moment. But that's when it was totally clear to me, like crystal clear, this is what I want to do with my life. And I actually wrote a long letter to the conductor of the San Francisco Symphony, Michael Tilson Thomas, who had been conducting that concert. And I asked for conducting lessons and told him all about my own musical interest. It was on. It was like 9 or 10 page letter, very, very long. And, I figured I probably wouldn't hear back because, usually when you write fan letters, you don't hear back from people. Sure. But Michael wrote me back right away and gave me incredible advice that I keep to this day. So that was what set the course for everything else.
And so then your formal education, can you talk about that and how that started? And who were some of the teachers that influenced you?
Well, I'm very fortunate to have had a pretty big list of wonderful teachers who all had different perspectives. And my clarinet teachers were, extraordinary. In fact, my first clarinet teacher who really pushed me to see what was possible on the clarinet is a man named Jim Freeman. And Jim was a beautiful clarinet player and the most rigorous, systematic, methodical approach to clarinet playing and technique that you could find. And he had this big book called The List. It was called The List. And it had everything from this is exactly how you choose your reeds. This is exactly the way you practice a difficult pattern. This is exactly the right kind of posture and the right way to use your thumb. And after studying with Jim for about a year or so, Jim decided to introduce me to his teacher, who was this kind of legendary clarinet figure named Kalman Opperman, already in his 80s in New York. And he lived in the middle of Manhattan, lived in what now is one of the most expensive neighborhoods. But when he moved there, it was so long ago, I guess he'd moved there in the 40s at this point. He'd been there for about 50 years. This was in the mid-90s. It was once the artist district. It was quite literally the place that the artists hung out. And his neighbor was Dorothy Parker, and they used to get together. This is just to paint a picture of this guy. He was the crustiest, most challenging clarinet teacher ever. And I would go to his place in New York, and Opperman would just there'd be like 8-9 hour lessons. And he'd make me repeat passages over and over. Sometimes he'd basically close me in a room and say, "Don't come out until you can articulate this at, tempo, quarter note to the 144 or something like that." And I mean, it was borderline whiplash style.
Yeah, really. Yeah, it sounds like it.
But he later told me, I stopped studying with him after a couple of years because it was a lot for a 10-year-old. But
oh my gosh,
yeah. But he later told me, I visited him a few years later, and he said, Teddy, the thing I wanted to teach you was discipline, and he did. He taught me that. I mean, it was the school of hard knocks, but it was the kind of discipline that you have to have at some point in your musical training. There's a long way of explaining it. There's a fun note that Jim Freeman later applied his methodical talents to coffee. And he stopped teaching the clarinet and eventually started a coffee company, which is one of the most successful in America right now. It's called Blue Bottle Coffee. And if you've ever been to New York and San Francisco and LA, I mean, it's one of the really high-end coffee places. So Jim, he has the same methodical approach. So, and then on, piano, I had incredible teachers, especially a person named Paul Hirsch in San Francisco was my teacher. He taught me at the San Francisco Conservatory where I went. And just, Paul was one of these people where everything technical, everything about the pianistic side of things was only in service of the music. His only interest is, was that interesting? Was that person making music? That was all that mattered. He would kind of frequently deride people, kind of jokingly as pianimals, like if they had nothing but technique. And so it was all about, are you saying something? Does this person have a voice and a message? And I really learned to listen that way, as opposed to trying to do things right or play well. It was all about, are you doing something in service of the music? And then kind of overseeing my education was Tilson Thomas. He really became my mentor and my regular teacher, and would bring me out to the New World Symphony to work there, several times a year, starting when I was about 14. So I really had this, remarkable kind of constellation of teachers, and they all influenced me in very different ways.
Wow, that's amazing. And I think it's a good point that you said, you have, some teachers that are really strict and they instill that discipline in you. And I think that's what a lot of, like you said, students, if they want to succeed, you have to have that discipline aspect. But I like how you talk about later on that they're taking the musical side. So you have the technique, you get the discipline, but that technique serves to help you express your own musical ideas. And the better technique you have, I guess you would assume, the more musical ideas you could express. At least that's the way I look at it. Yeah.
The technique definitely, has to be in service of something greater. And I mean, the more interesting a musician you are, the more slack people will give you for your technique. I mean, if you are creative enough. In fact, I remember, my piano teacher would always talk about, all these interesting pianists, and some of them were ridiculous. Like, what is it? The Mo or whoever it is from the Stooges. Who would play the piano, and you'd say, like, that's some of the most interesting piano playing ever. It's not the most technically advanced piano playing, but it's so interesting. Like, and he would always, it was kind of a joke, but his point was that to be interesting as a musician is by far the most important thing. He would say, does something track? In other words, when somebody plays, is it tracking from phrase to phrase? Like, is it keeping somebody's attention by really saying something, or are they just going through the music? And I mean, so many people with incredible technique are simply executing. Even if it's phrased more or less, there's not an underlying voice that forces you to listen. It's just like saying words. Most people can read. Some people are very fluent readers. Some people are fine readers, if you know what I mean. But how many people can speak in such a way that when they're reading the words, even if they're not their own words, that it's tracking to the extent that you have to pay attention. You can't stop listening. That's the rare skill right there.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. No, that's a good way to put it. I like the comparison with the reading and music. And I guess that's what separates the people. I mean, there's an entertainment factor to it, and that attracts the audiences. And if they can speak and connect to the audience and what they're playing, I guess those are the people that, kind of rise above. Because there's a lot of people who play at a very high level, especially today. And it's, you have to find those ways on how you can separate yourself from the pack in a way to stand out. So
even the difference between when I was in school and now is, I started at the San Francisco Conservatory as an undergrad in 2003. I was a little young. I was 16 then, but between that point and right now, the difference is actually staggering. That your average first year undergraduate violinist at any school these days is even significantly more proficient technically than they were just that 20 years ago or so. It's actually really quite extraordinary. And, schools like the San Francisco Conservatory, they had good students and individually great departments here and there, but weren't, regarded like Curtis or Juilliard. Now, almost every first-year violinist can probably play a pretty good Brahms and Sibelius concerto. That's expected. And when I was at Curtis, I mean, every single violinist had all the standard repertoire under their belt already. I mean, it would be crazy to go to Curtis, even as like a 12-year-old. Sometimes they would get in when they're 12 and not be able to play Sibelius, Brahms, Beethoven, et cetera, concerti. And that's crazy. When else in history would that have been the expectation? Like that by the time you've started at college, you've already essentially learned to some extent the major repertoire on your instrument. That's really crazy. So it's weird. So how do you distinguish yourself? Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's amazing. So your time at the Curtis Institute, how old were you when you entered Curtis?
So what happened, I had a very weird education path, and I went to the San Francisco Conservatory as an undergrad, and I was 16, but because I'd actually been in community college for years by that point, I technically started as a junior. So I was done when I was 18 and then went off for my graduate work at Curtis. But because I was 18, it felt like undergrad, even though as a conductor, they don't really take undergraduate conductors. Nobody really does. It's not common. In fact, many places that have a conducting department don't offer a bachelor's in conducting. It's only a master's or a PhD. So It felt like my undergrad because I was going, away, and all my friends were 18 too. They were all undergrads, and so I was at Curtis for 3 years in the conducting department. But the great thing about Curtis, especially then, is that it was so small, and it still is, but it was so small that you create the education you want. So even as a conductor, you're not limited to these courses and this method and this schedule. So I spent so much of my time out there. One of the first things I said, I want to accompany everybody because I want to be able to study with Pam Frank, and I want to be able to study with Arnold Steinhardt. I want to be able to play, for the piano faculty, Gary Graffman and Leon Fleischer and people like that. So I just spent, much of my time accompanying people for their lessons and their recitals, and that way I got to study with most of the faculty, and I got to experience, legendary teachers on most of the instruments and perform there with students. And it's, that's not a typical conducting study path, but it was beautiful and very influential in the way I thought about music.
Wow, that's amazing. And especially to have so many great artists, in a way, some legends. I mean, like you mentioned, I know the piano world, and Gary Graffman and Leon Fleischer, two legends of the piano, to have that experience. And then, Pamela, I mean, that's invaluable in a way, and especially for someone who's interested in collaborating with so many different artists and creating so much music. That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, the students too are so talented there that you learn from them. And, at Curtis, you get the whole range of different approaches to music. I mean, you have some, kind of the brainiac types that they have used their really exceptional intellectual powers to kind of get to where they are. You also have the just pure talent natural types that, it just came from the absolute, outer space in terms of what they can accomplish. And you have everything in between. And you end up learning as much from the students as you do from anybody else. And on top of that, there are lifelong friendships. So all these people I went to school with, they have remarkable careers. They've gone on to do wonderful things with music, and we still collaborate all the time. At school, for instance, I was huge as accompanist. She used to call me like 20 minutes before her lessons and say, "Can you come play with me? I'm going to play, at 12." And I said, "Okay, what are you going to play?" And she'd go, "Rock 3 and Bartok 2 and Brahms Concerto." I said, "Oh, okay, bring music. I'll play it." And then we'd play for Gary Graffman. Like, what an amazing experience that was. And then, we've been friends ever since. So it's a special place. It's a very, very special place.
So you're on the West Coast, you come to the East Coast, and then you find yourself in Louisville. How was that jump from school to your position now?
Well, I had a few different jobs in between. I started right after Curtis at the New World Symphony as the conducting fellow there, the assistant conductor, which was a remarkable experience. It was the period when they built their new building, the new Frank Gehry building. I guess I'm saying it's new, even though it's almost 10 years old, hard to believe now. But, that remains the gold standard of a technologically forward-thinking, community-style music hall. There still isn't anything quite like it that's so creative and out there. Really a grand kind of experiment in what a building can be for musicians. And I think it's one of the greatest experiences as an audience member to sit there in that hall, which is, only seats about 750 people. It's so intimate. Every seat is a good seat. They're not screens, they call them sails. They're giant white blocks that are all, like Frank Gehry style. They're all over the place inside, and each one of them comes alive as a screen, essentially, as a video experience. The outside is a giant video wall. They call them wall casts, where you can sit in the park and watch the concerts with a Meyer sound constellation, 380 speakers all working together to make it, one of the best sound experiences in the world. I was there for that, so I got to see what happens when people really, invest in creative work like that, and don't say, we have to undercut that, we have to cut the budget there, we have to, do less. Some people really said, let's do more, and they did. Mm-hmm. So that was wonderful. And I had a couple other jobs. I went to Budapest and lived there. I worked with an orchestra there as the resident conductor, and then came right away to the Detroit Symphony. And the Detroit Symphony had just been they had just had a very, very tough labor situation. There had been a big and very well publicized strike. And I was brought in as the assistant conductor to come and help with the rebuilding efforts, especially to conduct a lot of the community and educational concerts that were put into the schedule to help bring them out of the strike situation. There was a lot of money that was put forward if the Detroit Symphony could think about being much more community oriented. Mm-hmm. So I had 2 years of great experiences there, and then came down to Louisville.
Wow, that's quite the journey. You've been all over. With what we're going through now in the pandemic, I'm sure things have changed, and of course orchestras have had to adapt. I mean, a lot of people have had entire seasons canceled. How has the Louisville Symphony, how have they adapted, and what things are you doing during this crazy time?
It's funny because so many artists have had more time on their hands than probably they ever expected to have in their entire careers.
Absolutely.
But in my position, it's kind of the opposite, because I'm not an independent artist. I am part of this organization. My job is as an arts leader within the context of a large arts organization. And that means that there have been all these responsibilities that have kicked in. And in a way, I've actually never been busier. So it's a really strange thing. Not busy in the way I would have been in a normal sequence of a summer and fall, but busy in a different way. And that's involved really rethinking what the organization needs to be, because I'm responsible for the health of the orchestra, and I'm responsible for much of the administrative work that goes on. Even though I'm not the executive director, still I, as the conductor and the music director and an arts leader in Louisville, am responsible for making sure that this institution is creative, that all the musicians and the staff have their jobs. I mean, that's a very big responsibility as I see it. And I know a lot of my colleagues might not take that same kind of mantle, and they might not think that responsibility is really theirs. That's the job of the staff, I think many of them would say. I think it's all hands on deck right now. I think that you can't sit this out. You can't leave this to somebody else. As a conductor, I can't say, as a music director, I can't say that's somebody else's problem to figure out how to be creative in this moment. I need to be, doing everything I possibly can to keep our organization doing the work that it needs to do, which is serving the community with music. So that's meant all summer long we have been thinking about what the differences need to be and how we deliver music, what the creative approaches can be to healing the community. Louisville's been through a terrible, terrible ordeal between the pandemic, like everybody else, but also the Breonna Taylor case. Right. Means that there's been a focus on racial inequality and injustices and systemic challenges in the city that have led to, a real kind of heart-wrenching and very tragic loss of confidence in the town. And it's my job as an artist here to use our music to make people feel proud of their city, give us hope, to offer not maybe solutions, but pathways towards equality. And that's a huge job. That's not something that you can leave to other people. It's the job of the artist to step up and do something about it. So basically we spent all, between March, we were very lucky. We didn't waste time lamenting things. We didn't waste time hoping things would get better quickly. A lot of arts organizations, they kind of thought, well, come fall, I'm sure things will be better. There'll be a vaccine over the summer or something like that. We were lucky in one regard. We accepted the realities very quickly, and we thought, let's just revise the whole business model. Let's not try and adapt things and just do little, topical changes. So that's helped us a lot, that we were able to fully embrace a different way of making music. And it's led to, obviously, virtual work, concerts at drive-in theaters, a whole slate of education programs that we can do with the school district here online, from asynchronous teaching, where we can serve all these kids with basically private coachings and lessons that could never afford it before, to music therapy work with hospitals and frontline workers. We developed a huge project around that can be delivered over Zoom. So it's been actually a really fruitful time to rethink things. Of course, I wish it wouldn't come at such a high cost, but that you as the saying goes, you don't want to waste a crisis. You don't want to waste a crisis.
No, I think you're being innovative, and the way I look at it, I talk with a lot of people that are going through this. I say, there's a, we're going through a hard time, but I think what's going to be amazing is when we look 10, we're 10 years out and we look back and we look at all of the amazing creative things people have done during this time, being so innovative, and not just in the arts, in the sciences and, in healthcare and everything. People are being so innovative. It's really going to be amazing. And I'm excited to see, what things we discover. And I'm sure, the artists, who knows, maybe we'll have some really great works that are composed during this time and composers having more time. Who knows? I try to look at the positive that can come out of even the darkest times.
Well, it's the best way, I think, to approach these challenges. And, history tells us very clearly that some of the worst moments in human history have yielded some of the great creative minds. And given they've created room for new creative people to express themselves. And, what happens, and it's happened in America. America went from being this kind of scrappy cultural country that did things its own way and, forced its own path, to becoming one where all the pillars are so driven into the ground that it's almost impossible to move and shake them. You have these huge, giant performing arts institutions, $100 and $200 million budgets a year, that they're so huge that they're kind of like dinosaurs roaming the earth, and a huge asteroid just hit the planet, and mammals would never have existed without it. I'm not saying that those organizations didn't do incredible work, but a little bit of I think the American cultural landscape was ossifying. It was turning into a permanent structure that couldn't be changed. Nobody could challenge it. Nobody could question it. It was just locked in that Hollywood had control over the entire film industry. All of Broadway had to be in New York, and all these places kind of asserted themselves and said, this is the hierarchy that will never change. Now, there are opportunities for individuals and cities and communities to all reshape the landscape. And I think that's a really good thing. It's not good for creativity when one system and one structure just determines everything. You think about everything from the plague itself to World War II and the reordering of the entire planet culturally every single time. Every single one of those very tough moments systematically dismantled the structures that were already in place. And I mean this with no disrespect whatsoever to the incredible, big pillars. They're great, but there needs to be the opportunity for new life to come up and change things and offer new perspective. And this is what this will do if we let it. As long as we don't, if we wallow in it and kind of lament the past, we'll be consumed by it.
And so do you see this way of virtual, I know a lot of it's just for social distancing and safety, but do you see like the classical symphony audiences gravitating more towards the online route? And do you see maybe that people are going to incorporate maybe both in person and live, or in person and then online, like going forward from now?
Absolutely. This changes everything. And it is to be determined how far that will go. Mm-hmm. I hope that it doesn't just stop with, live stream concerts, but actually go much further into the idea of what virtual reality looks like and augmented reality looks like, and, what the future of concerts really can be, not just in terms of accessibility, but in terms of creativity. Because normally, arts organizations are so strapped, their budgets are so tight that the R&D budgets either are totally non-existent, or they're so small that they don't have the real power to invest long-term tech creativity. That's why a lot of large organizations like opera companies and symphonies are very behind, and it was a struggle for them to switch over to virtual because they hadn't invested in that technology. Only a few had. We're actually very lucky here in Louisville. We built a new concert hall, the Kentucky Center of the Arts, which is the main performing arts center with multiple halls, had constructed this new facility. We partnered with them to invest in a lot of built-in tech. So it has 8 robotic cameras and a full control room, an outdoor projection wall like the New Symphony, all built in, a full orchestra mic package. Most orchestras don't have access to a facility like that, which thank God we did, because that's what we've been playing all season long. Without that place, I don't think we'd be playing. And it just shows what forward investment can really do. But, you know, one thing I was thinking that, you know, just imagine in any given city, how many people are not able to join you for your concerts, either because of accessibility. Maybe they have a disability that doesn't allow them to make it to the concert physically, or, you know, they are not able to travel there for another reason. Maybe it's too expensive to travel there, or too far to travel there. Maybe they live in a senior home where the transportation is not available. Maybe they're sick, or they're you know, they're in you know, a care facility. It's almost discriminatory to not have your concerts live streamed, because shouldn't the thousands of people that love music that are in those situations have equal access to your music if you're able to produce it, which we clearly are?
Right. Oh, that's a fabulous point. And so, yeah. I mean, you and the Louisville Symphony, you're essentially paving the way, and for a lot of these orchestras, and I hope a lot of orchestras, you know, follow in line and try to explore this. You know, there's the age-old question, and I'm sure you've heard it, is classical music dying? And what I've seen with you is you've taken, you know, people that might necessarily not fit in the classical world, but you've kind of mashed them together. I was wondering if you could talk about that and maybe give us an insight of where you think audiences, we talked about, you know, how they receive the music and the outreach, but what are audiences looking for now in music? Is it just the strict people going to the classical music concerts, or are they looking for something else now?
You know, that's a great question. Classical music is certainly not dying, because I don't think of it as a monolith. It's a little bit like saying, is rock dying or is jazz dying? There may be trends across the board, but it's actually more important to consider each artist as an artist and say, or an organization as an artist, and say, is that group dying? Is that individual not having impact? Rather than look at, you know, kind of almost silly trends, because across the board, classical music does not mean anything. It doesn't. What does that mean? The word classical is an irrelevant term. It vaguely describes the repertoire that an orchestra or a string quartet might play. But, you know, that in the last couple of years, that's ranged from Monteverdi to dozens of world premiere commissions. What does that have to do with anything? When we talk about in rock and pop, we talk about genres so tiny that they, you know, can encompass things that only started a couple of months ago, and that's a new genre. So we've got things that have existed for, you know, 3 or 4 months, and we're comparing that to classical music, which is somehow used to describe 600 years of history. So first of all, it's almost not helpful to talk about that. What it is helpful to talk about is your organization or your own creative life as an artist reaching the people that you want to reach and being effective, and do you have a voice? And are you matching your marketing and your presentation with your content? Because I think that's what happens a lot of times. There's a breakdown between the talent side and the reach side. Mm-hmm. I've always said that you know, to be successful as an artist, you have to do incredible work. You do have to do ultra high level, creative, interesting work, but you also have to equally tell people about it. You have to be just as good telling people about it as you are doing it. And there are a lot of people that are one or the other. They're very good at telling people about it, but not actually very good at doing it. And there are a lot of people that are doing incredible work and not good at telling anybody about it. And that's one of our biggest problems. If there is a trend in classical music, there's too much of one or the other. There are people that are attention grabbers, but nothing behind it. And there are people doing some brilliant special work they don't have the first thought in their head about how to actually share any of it. And most of the rest of the industry is much better at doing those two things side by side. When there's a band or a creative singer-songwriter that has talent, the industry helps them to find a voice and get their word out, and helps them to develop a platform. Whereas we go, yeah, that's not really part of it. Yeah, if you figure it out, you're lucky. If you don't, that's too bad. And that's really not helpful as an industry. That is one thing that we can do with the industry. My thought is also that by calling ourselves classical music, we limit the connections that we can find in the industry. And you think about the incredible collaborations that have led to so many artists outside of so-called classical music doing great things. You know, collaborations between like Eric Clapton and Wynton Marsalis, for instance, like things like that, because they're not so specific as to what the rules are between genres. It allows for the natural bloom of collaboration that we often don't get to experience as artists, which I think is changing. But if we open ourselves up and say, we're just good musicians, we're good musicians who in the classical side can read music, have that fluency with the ability to have the printed page so it's set. That is the distinctive element right there. It's not really genre, it's not really technical capacity so much as it is the ability to codify something and share that. That allows us to plug into amazing ranges of musicians, whether it's a classical pianist or a jazz pianist or a rap artist. We should be open to working with the artists that we think are interesting. And those are going to be the collaborations that propel you forward, because they're never-ending possibilities right there. And it will help everybody expand their thinking and not think of themselves as genre-specific, because it's a meaningless designation.
Wow. Well, that's an excellent point. I don't think I'm going to call myself a classical musician anymore. I'm going to think more broader.
Well, it's the problem is that it has a stereotype, which
Right.
Hollywood is not helped with, but the idea of classical is so associated with, conductors wearing tails and being on, commercials or in film, or string quartets at a British, BBC show where they're out accompanying a fancy tea service. And it's just, that's silly. What does that have to do with anything? That has nothing to do with the essence of Bach. It has nothing to do with the essence of Caroline Shaw. It doesn't relate to anything except that's all external posturing. And the problem is the word classical has become indelibly associated with that outward look. It's purely a look. It's a stereotypical look, and it's just implanting in people's mind this idea of classical as an elitist kind of a very distinct, separate kind of listening experience, and we need to kill that.
So with taking that approach with your symphony, what have you seen with the audience? Are the audiences growing?
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. I mean, I think that part of it is that to gain an audience, I think most rock musicians and most pop musicians will tell you this, you have to actually work to build your audience. You can't just play a good concert and then believe that because you play such a great concert that people will flock to you. It doesn't work that way. You have to personally build it. It's like a campaign. It's like a political campaign. You have to go meet people and talk with them and explain why. It's like the person with the best ideas clearly doesn't just win elections. It's the person that connects with the most people that makes people feel like they're likable or that they trust them. Same thing in music. If the audiences feel connected to you and they feel like we like that person, we believe in them, we're connected to them, we like their story, then they'll follow you. But you can't just play an objectively great Beethoven symphony, check that box, and assume that all the listens will start flowing and all the spins will start flowing and all the plays on YouTube. It doesn't work that way. And frankly, in the past, it wasn't that way either. People love the personality of Leonard Bernstein. It's why they followed him and thought he was great. People love Michael Tilson Thomas's personality and approach to music and the way he talks about it. They loved hearing from Kusevitsky. They loved hearing from, George Zell was an incredible personality. Stokowski was a wild personality that people followed. It's always been connected. Music is not just some crystalline, separate concept from people. They're connected together.
No, that's great. And I think that's what people need to realize is there's the business aspect of it that you really have. You can't just have the talent. You have to have, a little bit business smarts, a lot of hard work and dedication, and that connection with your audience. And if you have those key ingredients, I think that's what's going to separate you and help you grow. And that's definitely what you've been seeing, with your own administration. What are you excited for coming up in your schedules and your programs? What can we look forward to?
Well, we actually have a couple of really special concerts coming up. There's a show that's two parts. It's got a celebration of the music of this state. And so we're going to do the 13-instrument Appalachian Spring, one of my favorite pieces of all time. And we're pairing that with a brand new world premiere set of music that is a collaboration with Sam Bush, one of the legendary bluegrass artists from Kentucky. Sam is just he's just one of the great musical minds. Newgrass Revival was his band. That he was the one who found Bela Fleck and put him in the band. Sam gets together with, they call it the super group that plays at Telluride Bluegrass Festival every summer. You know, Sam and Edgar Meyer, Tony Rice, Bela Fleck, Alison Krauss often joins. I mean, he's one of the great legends. Like, Sam is one of the legends, and just a special human being. So he is coming to perform with us, and it's a beautiful new set of orchestral collaboration. We commissioned it just for this. So that's next. And then after that is a concert that explores soul and Motown with a couple of Black composers that, even though maybe they're not Motown composers, but they support the overall theme of what we're trying to do here in Louisville, which is be the most inclusive orchestra on the planet. So that's going to be super fun. And those are all brand new arrangements and orchestrations that we commissioned too. And we just finished an all-Stravinsky program a couple days ago. That was on Saturday. And that was all these really great, often underplayed pieces of Stravinsky, like the Ragtime for 11 Instruments, a couple of weird duets. There's one for 2 trumpets, one for 2 bassoons, the Dumbarton Oaks Concerto, the Octet for winds, and a brand new orchestration of the Firebird for smaller orchestra, which is fabulous. One of the coolest reductions I've ever seen by this German composer Paul Leonard Schaefer. I mean, it's just masterfully done, and it's for an orchestra of about 20 or 23 people or so.
Wow.
We've been busy.
Yeah, to say the least. No, that's an incredibly exciting program that you have planned. So for someone like here in Charles City, Iowa, you know, I don't have the luxury of seeing some of these concerts live, and I know right now we're in a pandemic, and so a lot of them are online. Can people all over the U.S. and the world, do they have access to some of your concerts?
Yeah, all the concerts are virtual. We are going to, it looks like we're going to start actually playing in-person concerts very safely and carefully later this year. But for right now, the concerts are completely virtual. We call it the Louisville Orchestra Virtual Edition, so LOVE. And anybody can access it, totally available. We thought a lot about whether it should be free or not. We're doing a ton of free work, so we're putting out regular free content. And the last concert, the Soul and Motown concert, will be totally free. But to get access to the whole package of music, which are all the concerts, plus our musicians get to choose their own repertoire to support the concert. So what they were doing is every other week, when we're not doing the full concerts, musicians play chamber music that they chose themselves that fit the theme. I wanted the musicians to have agency this year and feel like they were excited about the music that they're playing. So, for instance, the first program was centered around heroes. So it was all about a concert in memory of Breonna Taylor paired with Beethoven's Third Symphony, the Eroica. So we asked the musicians choose music that fits that theme for chamber ensembles, and you can choose it, and then we record it, and all that music gets uploaded to the same LOVE network, the virtual platform that we have. So there's a lot of extra material. Every concert has 3 or 4 supporting pieces to go with it, plus explanations from the musicians about the music.
Wow, that is exciting. Well, that's really cool that you're getting everyone involved, and it sounds like the musicians themselves are, you know, super excited to be presenting this to everyone too.
Well, in a year like this, it's very important that you know, these organizations are so desperate, but you know, to find new ways of making music, but you can't leave out the musicians and the artists themselves. And I wanted to make sure that in a moment like this, we gave our musicians an opportunity to really use their own voices and do things that they never would have done ordinarily, so they don't feel like they're just being tossed around in the sea of all the, you know what I mean? It's a little bit like being passengers on a huge boat in the middle of a storm, where we're trying to steer the ship, but the musicians are on the ship, and they might not know, like, we're so busy, you know, trying to make it so we don't tip over. We don't have time to often, you know, update everybody as to what's going on. So I wanted this to be a moment where we all get to row together. I did not want our musicians to feel like they were just, you know, waiting around for more bad news from the administration. I think that's what we're seeing from a lot of musicians around the country, that they feel kind of helpless in so many orchestras where they feel like they can't do anything about the problem. So I wanted them to feel here like they can be a part of the solutions and help the whole organization, you know, find its way.
Oh, I love that. So in closing, do you have, what would your advice be to musicians, you know, that are looking to pursue a career in music, And then also, what is your advice to, I guess, people just in general during this pandemic, and specifically music audiences? What do you see going forward, and what's your advice to them?
I think that a moment like this has taught us that we can't wait for other people to do whatever the work of public service is for us. That's how I see it. I see music as a service to the community. Yes, it's an art and a creative outlet that has some independence. That yes, you could be a purely creative musician in a room with four walls and nothing more than that. But music really is a communication system. It's a language. It has real power to command the attention and the connection between people. And I believe that it has that power in a way that nothing else does. And that means that it serves as a public service. It's more than just a nice thing to have. It's more than just an extra. It's an essential part of our lives. We've made it that way, and it's always been that way. It's an ancient part of human culture. And I think what this is teaching us in this moment is that as artists, as individuals, whatever you do, whether you're in the creative realms or you're not, we have to be a part of our society in a way that wasn't really asked of us until this moment. For a long time, I think there's been a sense of, well, somebody else will take care of that. Somebody else will run for that office. Somebody else will, deal with fundraising. Somebody else will deal with, making sure the city is safe, or that justice is served, that there's racial equity. Somebody will deal with that. That's somebody else's problem. We should just get the fruits of their labor. And I think this moment is teaching us, actually, that's not the point of a democracy. The point of a democracy is to use whatever talents and platforms and voices and power we might have as individuals to actually do the work that needs to be done to have the place that we want to live in. And that means as artists and musicians, I'm kind of connecting the two questions, but as artists and musicians, we have an obligation to do more with our powers and talents. It doesn't mean blasting people with political ideology, but it does mean asking ourselves, what can we do with this talent and this voice to make the community the place we want to live in? Not just how do we do our own music better for ourselves? What is it that we have to offer our neighbors? Maybe it's just changing one person's day. Maybe it's changing a school or a group of people, or serving people that have never experienced this before, connecting with them in a human way, one-on-one, one-to-many, it doesn't matter. But it's doing something that serves the public. I think we all have to engage with that now. That's the only way this country is going to find its way. Otherwise, it's just going to devolve into just such inequality and lack of enfranchisement that we may never recover from that. And our role as artists is more important than a lot of us ever realized. That's what I'd say.
Well, no, that was fantastic. Maestro Adams, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. This has been really inspiring for me, and I really enjoyed learning about your forward thinking and just everything that you're working on, and your outlook on life is it's really special, and I think a lot of people it will resonate with a lot of people. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to connect with you, and looking forward to seeing the interview online.